welcome to episode 3 of TemTalk, a podcast dedicated to the creature collection MMO Temtem. This episode, we're going to cover everything you need to know about breeding and the latest patch 0.5.15. And I say we because today I finally have a guest host, and his name's Kennedy. Kennedy, how are you doing?
Howdy doodles. I'm doing great this morning. Hello, everybody. Officially, I am Presby Kennedy. You can just refer to me as Kennedy. And we're going to be diving into this. I'm so excited.
I'm very excited to have you on the show with me today, Kennedy. I think it's very coincidental. You actually live near Seattle in Washington, where, of course, everyone is hearing about the coronavirus news right now, which, by all means, people came here to hear about Temtem and not more of that. You're safe and you're healthy out there in Seattle? No, you're not sick or anything?
I am, and we just started recording, and I'm trying not to sniffle because I don't want people kicking in my door and it's quarantine.
Everyone's going to accuse you of coronavirus. Yeah, no, it's the perfect time to stay inside, keep yourself isolated, and play Temtems. It's not so bad, hopefully.
Oh yeah, fantastic.
All right, so the one of the big news today is we got patch 0.5.15 just came out. I don't know, was it a couple days ago? I don't know the exact date. March 12th it came out.
And it's at the start of this week or halfway through it or something.
Yeah, so it's the patches. It's no new content. It's all bug fixes. But it's people are happy for a lot of the bug fixes.
One thing I think that's super duper cool about Crema as a company is you see lots and lots of companies with new games that come out like this, and all they want to do is just add new content to the game, and then there's more and more bugs that get put into the game, and it becomes more and more bloated and more things don't work. So I think it's a really awesome approach that before they proceed forward, they're stopping and saying everything we have, we're going to make sure it works, it's fine-tuned, and it's tweaked, and it's not crashing the game for you. So I appreciate it.
I agree completely. I think it's nice that it doesn't, it feels like an early access game maybe in the amount of content or how content's missing, but the polish of the game doesn't feel like an early access game. It's not buggy or glitchy. A lot of things work and smooth, and they're obviously committed to keep going in that direction with so many bug fixes.
Yeah, 100% agree on that. The polish of this,
So by all means, I don't want to sit here and read through this whole bug list for everyone. You can check it out on their website. But you were explaining to me actually before we started recording about how they fixed the exploit with checking if an egg contains a Luma. So you want to go over that again for everyone?
Yeah. So one of the major bug fixes that came through in this past patch, there was a way for the owner of an egg when they bred 2 Luma Temtem to check and see if the egg was going to result in a Luma Temtem that came out of the egg. And so what they would do is they would check, see if it was a Luma. If it wasn't a Luma, they would sell it on the Discord marketplace saying, Luma egg from these 2 Luma parents, you have a chance of getting a Luma when you open this egg, 100% sure knowing that it wasn't going to be a Luma. So that exploit was fixed. So now nobody can know if an egg is going to be a Luma or not before it hatches. So before you buy any Luma eggs off of the Temtem marketplace on the Discord, you probably want to let a week or 2 pass just to let all of the bad eggs that people know aren't Lumas just kind of fade out of existence, and then go back to buying your Luma eggs.
So basically people were, if they knew they actually had a Luma in their egg, they just wouldn't sell the egg because they'd wait for it to hatch, and they could make a lot more selling it as a Luma. But they could still charge more for the egg with the chance of it being a Luma, even though it wasn't. So I'm glad they took care of that. And the other thing that people seem to be excited about on Reddit was the synergy ability of Adoraboros being fixed while carrying gear. Although you also, you were telling me too, there's not that many synergy abilities. So who is this helping fix, or who is excited? But apparently some people are excited to get Adoraboros being more useful now, at least. I
really like Adoraboros as a Temtem because it's a huge special wall. Its special defense is out of the wazoo, which is, going to make it great. And its other ability is Toxic Skin, which when it's hit with a physical move, it has the chance, it poisons the enemy Temtem that hit it. So, and it didn't have great physical defense. So being able to actually use gear and then synergy is going to give it more options now as far as if we see it in any competitive matches, as it will need those items to withstand some of like the bigger physical threats out there, as far as like any items that can, you know, reduce the amount of damage that it's taking
Right.
per turn.
One of the things we didn't see in this patch, but that they announced, was that the neutralized status is becoming renamed as nullified. They made a post on Crema did on Reddit about suggestions to rename it. And so we kind of were speculating and talking about this on what this means for the next spring patch update. So the exact tweet from them said, we have a winner after some internal deliberation and watching your proposals and reactions closely. Neutralized status will become nullified status. And correct me if I'm wrong, the neutralized status is the one where the type advantages no longer are in effect for that Temtem, right? So if it's normally resistant to damage, you can do full damage to it if it's neutralized, or it will now be called nullified. Is that right? Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, yes. That's completely what Nullify does.
Yeah. So this change, among many others, will be part of the upcoming spring patch. So, and they said look forward to it. So that change wasn't in this patch. So that means this isn't the spring patch, and we have to look forward to that soon with this and many other changes and hopefully content. So we were talking, you think that hopefully it means the spring patch is coming out soon.
Yeah, so this patch 0.5.015 was just all bug fixes. And before this patch came out, they did tweet about the nullified change being implemented in the spring patch. And that tweet came out before this patch, and so I was kind of hoping, I was like, when I saw these patch notes, I was like, spring patch. But then going through and reading, it's like, oh, okay, it's not the spring patch. And yeah, spring's like the day spring starts, it's like March 19th, so it's coming up.
Yeah,
and
I like this research. You were looking at when the official date of spring is, so we could have the patch based on as early as the 19th, if that's what they're going off of. Though I think it'll be more of a case of when it's ready, we'll get it. But hopefully soon, right?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that you discussed in the last episode. Was that they were hesitant about putting out a roadmap because they didn't want to be tied to deadlines. They're doing excellent at polishing all their content before they release it. And so I think that philosophy of, when it's ready, it'll be released as soon as it's possible, or as soon as possible. But I do think, on the same note, with the small things they've been communicating to the community in between, I do think that it's on the horizon.
So let's move into our main topic for the day, which is all about breeding. We're going to go into all of the details and cover all the minute information, so you know everything you need to know about breeding. If you're a more casual player who's just interested in improving the SVs of your Temtem, or maybe making a perfect Temtem for yourself, but not necessarily making money, you'll know everything you need. But also, if you want to be a Temtem breeder and maximize your profits, you're going to be able to do that with this information. So with that said, Kennedy, you were telling me that you just bred your first perfect Temtem recently, so it's hopefully fresh in your mind, your experience. Just tell us about how that went. What was frustrating? What did you like? What was challenging? Doing for the very first time, what was that like for you?
I like to do a critique sandwich. So I'll give a positive, I'll give my negatives, and then I'll give a positive, just to end it out.
Yeah, that sounds good.
On a good note. So one of the things that I really, 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 really enjoyed about the breeding process was probably the amount of effort that it took, and just as far as like on my own. For breeding my first Temtem, I really didn't use the marketplace that much. And I just went out in the wild and just caught bunches and bunches of Ochlura so I could breed a perfect mix, which is a mental and crystal type Temtem. And like just going through that process of catching all of the Ochlura and then starting to breed them together and pair them off and move up through the breeding tree, it really bonded me to my Temtem, of knowing like when I get to my end product, like this Ochlura is something that I handcrafted together, that I have like that bond with. Monster collection games, you tame monsters and they become your monsters, even though there's hundreds of thousands of digital copies of these.
You had that unique connection kind of with this one.
Yeah, it really felt
really cool.
Yeah, it really felt special.
And it clearly evolves into Minx too, which I think I have to agree with you. It's such a cool Temtem. I immediately was looking at all the Temtem and thinking about what I wanted to breed, and I also was like, I wanted to put this on my list. I didn't for a specific reason, but I'll get into that later. But go on.
Okay, yeah, and we can talk about teams later too. Like, I got a lot of ideas on that. But yeah, and so my negative would be I really like how you can control the stats that your Temtem that get passed on to your Temtem, but gender locking was such a huge issue with limited fertility that it added about 3 more days to the process.
Well, that's exactly why I didn't go for Minx, because the gender ratio is not 50-50. They're more likely to be male than female by 60 to 40%. I was like, I don't want an early breeding project to have skewed genders, which we'll get into the finer point of details of what that means. But yeah, it's very frustrating when you don't get the right gender, isn't it?
Yeah, and so we're going to talk more about this at base. If you're on your own, if you're breeding up a Temtem from scratch, you're looking at spending about 61,000 Pansun to create a perfect Temtem, and that's not including any times you get gender screwed. And
that's
basically,
with perfect RNG, that's the minimum you'll spend. You'll likely spend more.
And what gender locking is you breed 2 Temtem together. You have a male and a female. They yield a baby, and then you breed another 2 together for 2 stats. And so you have 2 Temtem and each one of them have 2 perfect stats. But gender locking is you'll get 1 male and then you'll get another male, which means you have to redo a leg of that tree because you can't breed 2 males together. You need to get a male and a female. So the gender locking was a huge issue. But what really helped with my gender locking was it forced me to connect with the marketplace and the Discord community and just constantly keep posting of just like, hey, I've got this male Eclura, I've got another male Eclura, I've got another male Eclura. Anybody want to anybody want to trade these? And eventually about on day 3, somebody reached out to me who was gender locked with all females. And we swapped, and people are so willing to do this on the Discord, where they'll swap Temtem with the same stats, like same type of stats for different genders for people who get gender locked. And that really helped. And so what I'll say on my final part of breeding, I really, really, really like the amount of freedom inside of the game to trade and swap Temtem. I think a lot of collection games really restrict your ability to trade, and it makes the game so much more limiting and so much more difficult and so much more unenjoyable and so much harder to bring people into, that the freedom to swap Temtem with people, the freedom to breed and buy and grind Pansun and all of that makes me really excited for the future of the Temtem marketplace. And bringing my friends into it, being able to help them out of just like, I'm not going to give you the best Temtem, but I can give you a couple to get you started on your path, and then you can breed them together and build your own perfect Tems.
Well, that's an interesting point, because I think a lot of people online can be frustrated by the lack of multiplayer MMO type features in Temtem, and they're like, oh, it's supposed to be an MMO, but there's chat's disabled, for instance. There's no trading house. But you're 100% right that the trading of the breeding is like the big MMO element of the game right now. There's so much community going on for swaps and selling, and it is definitely the biggest multiplayer part of the game right now, I think. Of course, besides PvP battling, but I think people spend a lot more time in the trade channels and breeding right now, right? Yeah, exactly.
So I guess I'll ask that back at you. What was your experience like breeding your first couple perfect Tems?
My first experience, I made an awful decision. I tried to breed I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation, but Anahar, the unique one that you get for the storyline.
Oh,
which I made a mistake of breeding that because you can't capture more females if you need them. You just have the one. So I failed miserably on that and gave up after investing too much money. And that's why when I started my multiple breeding since then, I was like, all right, I'm going to only breed Temtem with 50-50 gender ratios. And since then, that went terrible. I sunk a lot of money and I got like a 5 SV offspring, a couple of them, but no perfect one. But after that, I've done much better. I think I've bred 4 or 5 perfect Temtems since then, and really enjoyed it. But I mean, without further ado, let's go deep into this.
Real quick,
Yeah.
before we do, if
Yeah.
we could talk on this for another second. One thing that I think is super cool, and we're about to dive into this, is that you can breed Temtem with other Temtem as long as like they're the same type. They don't have to be the same species. And so one thing that I hated about the breeding process at first was like, I was like, it's going to take this much effort for a perfect Tem every single time. But once I bred my first perfect Temtem, and I realized how the breeding works with being able to mix different species of Temtem, and they only need to be the same type. If you get like a dual type Temtem, you can breed the males of that generation with females of a different species. So you really only have to climb the ladder about one time. And then let's say with your Anahir, which is a fire and crystal type, and you got all males, and it's got a little bit of fertility left, and you've got one that has 5 perfect SVs, and you're trying to get a 7 SV perfect something down the line, you could, let's say, breed a 2-vine, which is a wind and crystal type, with that Anahir, and you could skip half of that breeding process and get a perfect 2-vine, as long as you've gone up the line and gotten a 5 SV female 2-vine. And so I thought that was really cool that once you're up there, you can kind of string it out, and one perfect Temtem actually gives you about a dozen perfect Temtem of your choice.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, that if you want to be like your role in the game as a Temtem breeder, once you get going and you have that stock and you have multiple, lines of Temtem bred, just like breeders in real life, it enables you to keep going and really make a lot more money, where it can be a little challenging to do it on your own. So I think any player is going to have to decide. I think everyone should dip their toes in breeding, but you're gonna have to decide: do I want to just grind my Pansons by releasing, just buying the perfects I want, or do I want to really build up a stock of perfect Temtem to crossbreed and be able to keep going? Because once you pick up enough steam, you certainly can make a lot of money selling perfect Temtem, and it becomes a lot easier the more you're doing it, and the more you're keeping those genders that weren't the gender you needed for this particular line, but you can use it on the next one, right?
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, let's talk about these mechanics. We've been touching on a few things that players may be familiar with, but maybe not. So the main 2 reasons you're gonna breed a Temtem are to get perfect SVs and to get egg moves. And egg moves are techniques that Temtem can only get through breeding. That if you just capture a wild Temtem and it levels up, it's going to learn certain techniques that species can learn, but it will never be able to learn these egg moves. But if you breed a different species that can learn one of these egg moves with the Temtem you're breeding, then you can pass that technique into the species, and all of a sudden you have this extra technique and this extra edge. So egg moves are a big part of it, but again, SVs are the biggest part of it. I said primarily 2 reasons. People can also breed for traits and to try to get Lumas, but we'll go into that a little bit more. So how exactly does the breeding work? We've kind of mentioned it, but if you want to just start breaking down on the base level, where do people start out with?
Let's jump into it. So the very, very primary building blocks of breeding: for every time you breed, you need 2 Temtem. You need 1 male Temtem and you need 1 female Temtem. These Temtem don't have to be the same species, but they do need to have the same typing. So how we were talking about Anahir earlier and 2-vine, Anahir is a fire and crystal type, and 2-vine is a wind and crystal type. Even though they're different species, because they share this crystal typing, they can breed together and produce an offspring. When they breed together, you will always get whatever the females, whatever female Temtem you've put into that breeding pair, you'll always get the female gender's Temtem species. So in the example we used with the male Anahirs and the female 2-vine, you would get a 2Y, which is the pre-evolution of 2-vine, as the offspring from that parent. In order to start any breeding process, you need to go to the second island. We looked this up and went back and forth on the pronunciation. Omanesia is where the breeding area is located, and you can breed up to 4 Temtem at a time. You can have 2 sets going, and when you put your 2 Temtem into the breeding process, it will try and predict what you'll get, and it'll give you a little summary of it, and it'll tell you what you're going to get from the egg and what you can likely get from the outcome.
Yeah, perfect. And so, like you said, the offspring will always be the same species as the mother, but what will be random is the gender of the offspring. It's either going to be male or female, obviously. And unlike, in real life where it's generally a 50% chance, that is the case for a lot of Temtem. There's a 50% chance for it to be male and a 50% chance for it to be female. But depending on the species of Temtem, that can change. All Temtem have a gender ratio. And you can look it up for any particular Temtem on the Wikipedia for that species. And so what I was kind of talking about with the Anna here and some of the others is when it becomes unbalanced, it can be very tricky, because basically you're going to need certain pairs of genders as you breed down the tree. You're going to want males and females that can, if you get all females or all males or an imbalance, you obviously can't keep breeding until you restore that balance. And you also, if you're breeding, you always want the female to be the species that you're going for if you're breeding different species together. So it can get tricky. And that's something to consider when you're deciding which Temtem you want to go for to breed. I'd highly recommend for your very first time trying to breed a perfect Temtem, definitely make sure the Temtem you can get is 50% male, 50% female. Another small thing to keep in mind is how easy is it to catch the Temtem. You can buy, single 50 SV Temtem from other players in Discord, but most people are probably going to want to try to catch a lot of them, just like you did on your own. So I would recommend for your first time breeding, just to practice the mechanics and see for them yourself, to pick a Temtem that isn't super rare. Don't get a Temtem that only spawns 5% of the time. That's going to be very difficult to breed. And you're going to notice in the sale price of perfect Temtem that the ones that have imbalanced gender ratios and the ones that you can only catch, with a 5% encounter rate, those ones sell for a lot more. So if you're looking to make money long-term, by all means, think about going after that, but know what you're getting into. Moving along here, so past the gender ratios, when you breed 2 Temtem together, if you don't use any items or spend any money besides just giving them both to the breeder, which, by the way, takes, anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes for them to finish their breed and give you an egg. But anyways, once you do that and you get that egg, you'll have the egg sit. It has to be in your inventory. And after, again, anywhere from 10 to 45 minutes, I think is the longest time I've seen that egg will hatch. And the SVs of the offspring have some calculations for what they're going to turn out to be. Naturally, there's a 40% chance of the offspring's SV for any single SV to be 40% is to be the higher of the two. So obviously there's 7 SVs, so this calculation is going to run for each of the SVs. But naturally, there's a 40% chance for the highest SV to be passed down from the parents to the offspring, from the mother and the father. And then there's another 40% chance of it just being an average of the two. So if the mother's is, SV is 1 and the father's is 25 or 50, let's say, for easy math, there's a 40% chance the offspring will just be 50 and take the higher value. Or there's another 40% chance that it would be 25, splitting the difference of the two. And finally, there is a 20% chance of it being the lower SV. So in this example, it could just be 1. But of course, when you're breeding, the whole point is not to leave it to chance, and that you can control this. And that's why we're talking about the cost of breeding being around 62,000 pansum minimum for a perfect SV. So you can buy DNA strands from a shop in the breeding house on the second island. And it costs 1,000 pansums for a single SV DNA or 5,000 for a pair. So what that means is you can spend 1,000 pansum and get about an item to be held by the mother and another to the father, and it'll guarantee to pass down one's SV stat. Or you can give them a more expensive item for 5,000 to pass down a pair of SV stats. And that's where it gets more interesting and how the perfect Temtem strategy comes into play, because there's only DNA strands of combinations of specific stats. You can't necessarily pass down any 2 stats on a parent in a breeding. You can only pass down the following as pairs: HP and stamina, or defense and special defense, or attack and special attack. So you'll notice speed is not listed. You cannot pass down speed and another SV on an offspring with an item, but you can pass down speed or any of these other ones as a single SV. So this is where it gets a little bit complicated. We'll try to have it make more sense. as we go through this, but it's very important to understand this and get a feel for it as you're going. The other thing that gets passed down besides the SVs is egg moves. Assuming that one of the parents has learned the egg move necessary by leveling up naturally, it will pass it down to the offspring if the offspring is of a species that can learn that egg move through breeding. By the way, if you're curious about egg moves, just Google whatever Temtem you're looking at breeding. Look at the techniques that can learn. There's going to be a section about what egg moves that Temtem can learn.
If I could jump in here too from something that
go
I
ahead.
while breeding. For egg moves, it's very important too. Your Temtem can, one of the really cool things about Temtem is they keep all of the moves they learn all of the time. They don't have to be within those 4 moves that they learn. But for egg moves, you need to have the egg move as one of the 4 active moves when you breed the Temtem. Otherwise, the egg move will not get passed on. So before you, if you're breeding for an egg move, make sure you take the time on whatever Temtem has the egg move to drag that egg move into one of the active slots.
That's funny. That's a great point. I didn't know that, but I was just by chance, I'm like, I wonder if this is how it works. I was always making sure to do that, but I didn't know for sure. So that's good to point out.
I bred a 2-vine with an Oclura to get humiliating slap. And I was like, oh yeah, this will be fine. It knows humiliating slap. Wait, where is humiliating slap? Hold on. And then I had to go back and rebreed that pair to get it on.
Right.
There.
I mean, it's just like we both have learned lessons on our first time through. So like I said, you want to keep your first chance through breeding, keep it simple, try to go for easy ones. Hopefully you can learn from our mistakes and not make them. The other thing with breeding, of course, is besides the SVs and the egg moves, I mentioned, I think I mentioned that either the traits also get involved. You know, every Temtem has 2 traits. But naturally it'll be random at what trait the offspring has, but there is an item, but it costs 10,000 Panson, so it's very expensive, but it will pass off if you give that to one of the parents, this item. I think it's an engineered DNA strain, it's called. It will give the same trait of that parent to the offspring. So that's very useful when you get towards the end of the process. If there's one trait that's way better and it's worth the investment, which sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. We can maybe touch on the market a little bit at the end of it. But just so also people are aware, you know, obviously sometimes when Temtem evolve, the first evolution or first stage will have different traits than the second stage. So if you want to understand, but those traits, they're controlled at what they're going to turn to when they evolve. So if you look at any Temtem in the Tempedia in game, or again on the Wikipedia, the traits, one will be listed on top and one will be listed on bottom. And so when a Temtem evolves, the same trait slot will carry through. So if I'm just happen to be looking at a Kalamazoo right now, which can have 2 traits, Mithridateum, I'm not saying that right, and Hydrologist. But Hydrologist is on the bottom. And if you evolve that Kalamazoo into a Calibus and it's a Hydrologist, then it's going to get Loneliness, because Loneliness is the bottom trait for Calibus. With that said, why don't you tell people a little about like how Lumas work? Because that's the one other thing that people might try to get when they're breeding.
Yes, so the other reason to breed is to try and get Lumas. The main way to get Lumas in the game is to encounter them in the wild, which is a 1 in 8,000 chance to encounter a Luma. When you breed a Luma Temtem with any other Temtem, it increases the chance by 10 times that the offspring will be a Luma. So that's going to turn that 1 in 8,000 chance into a 1 in 800 chance, or a 0.125%. Now, this gets infinitely better, well, not infinitely, but 10 times is better when you breed it with a second Luma parent. So when you breed 2 Lumas together, you have 100 times more likely of a chance to get a Luma. So that's going to be a 1 in 80 chance or a 1.25% chance to get a Luma from breeding.
Which I think is crazy, by the way. That, I mean, Lumas should be rare, and by all means, we can have a whole nother episode talking about rares, but even if you breed 2 Lumas together, you still have a 1.25% chance only of getting a Luma, but it's obviously much better than the 0.00125% chance you get randomly.
Yeah.
But it's still unlikely. Even if you buy 2 Lumas, it's still unlikely that the offspring will be a Luma.
If you heard me hesitating, I was trying not to let my biases like come in. Of just like I'm in the same boat of just like, oh, it's so difficult to get a Luma. When the game first released, it was like 1 in 4,000. And I guess
But
like,
Lumas are so cool, though.
yeah,
By the way,
exactly.
you have a mix that you perfect breed. The Luma mix, I think, is so cool. If I had to pick any Luma I wanted, that might be, if not my top choice, at least in my top three, a Luma mix would be
Yeah, someday we're gonna get a Chloras in the Psy Park with an increased Luma rate,
amazing.
and everybody will be there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I'm
Go
gonna
on.
jump on to yeah, fertility from there, because this is the other thing that's super important. So when you fertility is going to pretty much determine everything you can do with Temtem, as far as how much they're worth, if you can sell them to other people, and if they're even worth breeding. So when you catch a Temtem in the wild, it's going to start off with 8 fertility, and the fertility will look like 7 leaves around a stem. The stem is also one of the fertility marks. And the better the base SVs of the Temtem in the wild, the less fertility it's going to have. So, what Temtem does internally with its own coding and algorithm, it labels some SVs as good and some SVs as bad when you're catching a Temtem in the wild. And for every good SV a Temtem has, it loses 1 fertility. And for every bad SV it has a chance to gain an additional fertility up to a maximum of 8. Generally, if something has 1 perfect 50 SV stat, it's going to have 7 fertility. And there are often times with how the RNG and your luck works that you can get something with 2 perfect stats that has 7 fertility, or 1 stat with 7 fertility, or 1 good stat with 6 fertility. Generally, you're going to want to try and breed things with 7 fertility as going down the line of breeding. That's going to give you a perfect Temtem with the maximum amount of fertility you can have, which is going to yield you the best amount of Panson trading to other players. Why fertility is important is because each time you breed your 2 Temtem together, they're going to lose 1 tick of that fertility, and the offspring will always have the lowest amount of fertility of whatever the parents will have when the breeding's done. So let's take, for example, with the 2 7 fertility Temtems. When you breed them together, they're both going to lose a tick of fertility and go down to 6 fertility. And because they're at 6 fertility, the offspring is going to have 6 fertility. And a different example, let's say you breed something with 8 fertility with a Temtem that has 2 fertility. They're both going to lose a tick of fertility, and the 8 is going to go down to 7, and the one with 2 fertility is going to go down to 1. But the offspring takes the fertility of the parent with the lowest amount of fertility. So because one of the parents will have 1 fertility, the offspring is only going to have 1 fertility, even though the other parent has 8 fertility. So it's very important to be trying to match fertilities of breeding Temtem with 7 fertility, with Temtem that have 7 fertility, Temtem with 6, and that way, just as you move down the line, you're just making the most of a very limited resource you have.
Yeah, I think if you want to min-max breeding, and by all means, you don't have to, depending on your playstyle, but if you want to min-max it, you never want to breed Temtem with mismatching fertility. You always want to breed 2 with the same fertility. Otherwise, you're throwing away fertility on the offspring. So with that said, we've kind of covered the basics, how-to of breeding, all of the mechanics, and hopefully that makes sense. So moving forward now, we want to walk through what is the best way to get a perfect Temtem and to do it in a way that's going to min-max your fertility to give you as many perfect Temtem as possible and maximize your profitability, or at the very least, reduce your costs to be as low as possible.
Let's do some math.
Yeah, lots of math, and lots of Pansons. First of all, it's expensive to breed. There's no way shying away from that. It costs a lot of Pansons, but you can make a lot of Pansons selling them too.
Yes, you can. It's so funny as we're like talking about this, because I don't really have to discuss this with anybody, and I keep using my hands and nobody can see them.
Oh, that's funny. The little podcasting tip. Even when I did solo episodes, I actually gesture with my hands a lot to as I'm talking to keep my tone and less monotone. So we're both sitting here talking to microphones, staring at our screens, waving our hands around like crazy people in the air. Believe me. But anyways, to get a perfect Temtem, it's all about managing the fertility carefully, the egg moves and the traits, and you have to be methodical about it. You can do it. There is a rhyme and a reason to it. despite the system sounding like it can be complicated. So there's certain paths you can follow and a plan you can put in place to execute that's going to give you the best odds, minimize your risk of RNG, and maximize the amount of fertility you have at the end of this so you can get as many perfect Temtem out of it as possible. With that said, there is still RNG. Even if you do everything perfectly, there's no way to get away from the RNG of the gender ratios. And for good or bad, and it's a hotly debated topic, that is the breeding system. As the fertility gets reduced, you have limited resources. And if you're not getting the genders you want, you're going to have sunk costs that just get lost. But like I said, there's still a way to do this that you can walk away most of the time with profitability. I think it'd be very rare that you spend so much money and have such bad luck that you actually lose money on a breed if you do everything correctly. With that said, let's kind of jump into what that process looks like. So kind of, you just want to kind of tell people about what they should start out with before they start breeding. What kind of Temtem are they going to need in their box ready to go?
Yeah, so before you start breeding, you need to have a minimum required of 10 Temtem to start this process. And even though there are only 7 traits and 2 get passed on, it's a very strange but super cool way that the Reddit community has worked out that of a good way to optimize and pair these Temtem together. And I believe we're going to put that in the notes along with this episode, so you'll be able to see a visual guideline.
Yeah, there's a great chart that shows what we're going to be talking through. So I'll definitely put a link of that in the show description or somewhere for people.
Yeah, so you should make sure you have 10 Temtem with a single value of 50. Sometimes you can get really, really lucky. And this happened for me in my process. I had one Temtem that when I caught it in the wild, it actually had a 50 HP and 50 stamina. And it had like 1s and 3 other stats. But because it had that double 50 value right where I needed it, it actually jumped me ahead in the breeding process.
That's a really good point. Is people might get excited or they want to know the value of Temtem with multiple perfect SVs. If they have 2 SVs at 50 and it reduces the fertility, it may not be a good Temtem, or it may be. It depends. It's got to be. You want SVs that are going to be the DNA strand. So if you catch a wild Temtem with HP and stamina, that's good. If it's defense and special defense, that's good. If it's attack and special attack, that's good. But a Temtem that has 50 attack and 50 defense and only 6 fertility is actually, you can't use in a breeding program if you want to main max it, because its fertility is too reduced, and those 2 stats together aren't going to actually be that helpful as a combination.
Yes, exactly. So the one thing you want to make sure you have at least 1 Temtem with perfect attack, perfect special attack, perfect special defense, and perfect defense. You want to look to have 2 Temtem with perfect HP or perfect stamina, or 2 Temtem with perfect speed. Out of that last set, and I'm just like going through and I'm doing the math for myself, because you want to make sure on each side of this tree, as we start breeding up these Temtem, that when you get to pass on these traits, eventually you're going to stop buying the HP and stamina DNA that passes on those 2 traits, because both legs of your breeding line will all have HP and stamina. So when it's randomly determining, is it going to pull the HP and stamina from the father, or is it going to pull the HP and stamina from the mother? You don't have to have an item there to pull it, because on both...
If I may, and hold that thought actually. So
I don't know if I'm jumping ahead.
No, you're doing fine. So it's in the chart example, it's HP and stamina, but you can actually double up on any of the pairs of stats.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be HP and stamina. And another good way to think about the 10 Temtem and trying to figure out exactly what you need, think about it in the pairs that you're going to need. So it's not necessarily that you just need 2 Temtem in this example with perfect HV, but you specifically need a pair of Temtem with HP and stamina, and another pair with HP and stamina, the male and female ratios being so they can both breed with each other.
Yes, and this is one of the things where like breeding is such a huge and wonderful area of Temtem and what you can do with it. So One of the reasons why they suggest HP and stamina as the side that you double up on, so all of your 5 SVs have HP and stamina, is there's a whole marketplace out there of people who really don't care about breeding for the absolute 7 perfect SV stat. Of some people only need 5 specifically for what they're going for. So and those people buy things that are called breed checks. So once you get done with this process, all of the Temtem that have 5 perfect SVs, or some that have 3, and then all of your like rejects, which are your breeding rejects that you don't need, there are a market of people out there that are willing to buy them and use them on their teams when they say, or when, for example, you just need somebody who is going to be a special defense or physical wall, and they don't even have to worry about attacking. They wouldn't care if something has like attack or defense, but they would care if that breeding reject has HP and stamina on it. So it just kind of makes it a little bit more sellable for you if you want to recover your money.
HP and stamina are a little bit more valuable than attack and special attack, or defense and special defense, basically.
Yeah.
But if you know you're going for all 7 out of 7, then you can double up on any of them. But generally speaking, they're more valuable.
And so, yeah, just jumping from there, as we talked about earlier, if you're going for egg moves, you want the males to have, ideally, you want the males to have the egg moves, and you want to breed that onto your Temtem early in the process. Ideally, in like the first leg of breeding, so everything you breed from there will always have the egg moves moving on, and you don't have to worry about the fears of getting gender screwed or gender locked. And then you want to make sure each leg of this tree, you have a female of the type that you're trying to breed. And each leg of this process, you have a female, so that your ending result, you always get the female's gender. So when you get that perfect Temtem, it's going to be the female's gender, and you get the Temtem that you want. The remaining males can be any species, as long as, again, they match the same type.
Yeah, so with the egg moves, I can't stress enough to just plan for all of the egg moves before you get started. That was something that I think an early mistake I made, is I was breeding for 2 or 3 egg moves, and I was like, oh, I'll breed in this egg move later down in the process. I wouldn't recommend doing that. Have your first round of breeding, plan out exactly how you're going to cover 3 of 3 egg moves in each pair of that, and keep those egg moves just going through the rest of the process.
I think it's so funny that I was the one who got to remind everybody of starting the egg move early, because for me too, I was on my 5 SV Oclura, and I did not breed the egg move in yet. Oh, no. And I had like 4 fertility left, and I needed the egg move, and I had to go and get a 2 vine and breed it up to that point. And breed Humiliating Slap, and I was just like praying. I was like, female, please, please.
Yeah, you want to take care of the egg moves early, because you're going to be too worried about other stuff later down the process. Definitely.
Yeah.
But so moving forward with that process, so what's going to happen is you have your Temtem in their pairs based. So you're going to buy the single DNA strain that passes on 1 SV for each of those. So it's 1,000 Pansun each. So basically, if we follow through with this example where you're doubling up on HP and stamina, you're going to have a pair of Temtem that you breed their attack and special attack together, and you're going to pay 2,000 Pansung for that. You're going to have another pair of Temtem where you breed their defense and special defense, and then you're going to have 2 pairs where you're breeding stamina and HP. And what that's doing then is you're going to have 4 offspring after this first round of breeding, each with 2 SVs at 50. Fertility is important, like I said, so you're going to have to start with all of these Temtem must have 7 fertility, and by doing so, these 4 offspring will all be down to 6 fertility, and that's what you're going to have. You're going to have 4 Temtem with 6 fertility and 250 SVs. What you do then, and this is where, so you've used 8 of your 10 Temtem. The last 2 that you have are 2 Temtem with 50 speed and 7 fertility, and you're going to breed those twice with these offspring. And you can use the same Temtem twice, because the speed Temtem will have 7 fertility the first breed and the 6 fertility on the second breed. But since these offspring are already at 6 fertility, all of the offspring regardless will have, I'm losing myself in my own math, they'll have 5 fertility at the very end or more. So So your first round is you get 4 pairs with double SVs based on, attack, special attack, defense, special defense, HP, stamina. And then you breed those with speed. So you have 4 more offspring after that. And these offspring are going to have 3 SVs at 50. It's going to be those same stats, but plus speed. So all 4 of these offspring are going to have 50 SV speed, but they're also going to have a pair of other stats in there. And they're going to be down in their fertility.
Once you've got those 4 offspring with their additional with the speed stat, and then they either would have HP and stamina and speed, or attack, special attack and speed, or defense, special defense and speed. The reason why you breed into that process, since you can't pass speed along paired with anything else, the whole thing about getting a perfect Temtem is eliminating the RNG out of it. So now that every one of your pairings has speed, whatever you choose to breed together next, the speed will 100% be passed down. No RNG, no items needed.
Something that's really important at this point, when you're down to these 4 offspring with 3 SVs at 50, gender ratios can really start to mess with you. So out of these 4 Temtem, you need perfectly to have 2 females and 2 males, and you need that split between your redundant stats of HP and stamina in this example. So if these 4 offspring, if 3 of them are males, only 1 of them is female, that means you can't go on. You need 1 more female. So you have 2 options, and the first is to just rebreed the parents you just used. But what that does is gives you lower fertility in the process, and it's going to start taking away fertility from the final breed, and you're going to be able to make less money. So if you're doing this casually, by all means, you can try to do that. But if you really want to min-max this, what you have to do, if you get to any of these points and you don't have the right genders, you have to restart that specific branch of the tree from the beginning. You have to go back to getting some single Temtem with a single SV at 50 and 7 fertility, breed them together, find another Temtem with speed, breed that together, and pray that the offspring is the gender you need. So if you had 3 males and 1 female, for instance, and say that you need like the attack and special attack to be female, you just rebreed that and hope to get a female offspring. If you get another male, you have to restart the process again and keep doing it until you get a female for that slot.
This is like where the MMO aspects of the game come in handy. I highly suggest, as you go through this process, connecting to the official Temtem Discord and just following the marketplace and even posting on it occasionally, because just as much as RNG screws you, it will screw as many other people inside of the Temtem community, and you'd be surprised who's willing to swap just instantly, no pan sun, no, just like, oh, you've got a male and I've got a female and I need a male, let's swap. You can connect with people to make this process go a lot quicker.
Yeah. And it's kind of up to the player. I personally, if I'm only on like the second or third line of the breeding, I'll just redo it myself. But as you get near the end,
agreed too.
As you get near the end, you're definitely going to want to look at just gender swapping with another breeder, because it'll save you a lot of money. But moving forward, so you're going to have these 4 offspring, and you should be at 5 fertility if you're doing everything right. And now what you're going to do is you're going to buy, and this is where the 5,000 Pansum DNA strands come into place that pass on 2 SVs per parent. And so these pairs of parents, they're both going to have speed at 50, so you don't need to buy an item to pass on the speed, because it's going to be a 100% chance that the offspring speed is 100. And so that's why we bred it in this very specific way. So what you would do then is you'd have a Temtem with attack, special attack, speed, and another one with stamina, HP, and speed. You put the DNA strand Mighty DNA on the one with attack and special attack, and that's going to guarantee both those pass on. And on the other one, you're going to put a Vigor DNA, which is stamina and HP, and that's going to guarantee both those pass on, and speed's already going to pass on without you doing anything. So what that's going to result in is that offspring will now have 5 SVs out of 7 at 50 on one half of your breeding, and then your other pair of offspring will breed whatever stat is missing onto that one. So in this example, your other pair would be defense, special defense, and then HP and stamina again. And now all of a sudden you're down to 2 offspring, each with 5 perfect SVs, and their fertility is reduced from 5 to 4. And this is where the gender ratios really get challenging. We keep saying that, but you only have 2 Temtem that you can breed together. So one has to be male, one has to be female. If you get both males or both females, you got to either gender swap one of those with someone from the community or restart the whole one process of the chain. But the good news is you're very close to being done at this point, and you're almost done. As soon as you do get a male and a female at this point, you can just breed them together one more time, and you just have to buy one more 5,000 DNA strand with each of them. And it's going to be not HP or stamina, because both parents now are going to have speed, stamina, and HP at 50. So all 3 of those are going to pass down automatically, and you only need to buy an item for attack and special attack and an item for defense and special defense. And when you breed those together, then what you're going to have then is a Temtem with 7 fertility, or excuse me, not 7 fertility. Wouldn't that be nice? No, you'll get a perfect Temtem with 7 SVs all at 50, and the fertility will reduce from 4 to 3. And the 2 parents will also have 3 fertility remaining. And this is why you've been going so carefully through this process, is you already have your perfect Temtem now, but you still have 3 fertility left on both the parents and the offspring. So all of a sudden you can start breeding this perfect Temtem with the parent based on the genders to get more perfect Temtem. But because you have a 7 SV Temtem, you only need to buy 1 DNA item for the parent that has 5 SVs to pass down that trait. And eventually you're going to have 2, 3, 1 fertility remaining, but you're going to have possibly multiple Temtem with perfect SVs breeding. So you can breed them for free. So once you have 2 perfect Temtem at 7 SVs, if there's fertility remaining, which there will be if you've done this right, you're going to create another perfect Temtem completely for free. And that's where your return on investment starts going, as long as you have fertility remaining. And this is where it comes into play, is you want to start looking at the trait and thinking about the traits of your Temtem and looking at what people sell and buy them for. If people really want, for competitive Temtem, they want a specific trait on their perfect Temtem. It's one of the reasons they're going to be buying these. So they might pay 15 or 20,000 more Pansums more for a Temtem with a specific trait. If that's the case, if it's more than 10,000, you definitely want to buy the engineering DNA strand, which passes on a trait. If the price difference is only 10,000 or less, then you might want to just let it be RNG, because it might not be worth the cost. But in theory, if you do all this correctly, you should be able to get anywhere from 6 plus perfect Temtem bred out of this. And depending on the species and the egg moves, you can sell each of those, very roughly speaking, anywhere from 25,000 Pansum to 45,000 Pansum each. Of course, you might not use up all your fertility. Maybe you are trying to be a breeder and continue with more breeding projects, and you want to keep some of these perfect Temtem, like we said at the beginning, to breed them not with the same species, but with a different female of a different species but the same type. So you have that option. But just looking at the numbers, if you want to sell all these Temtem and you want to go start to finish and look at the cost versus the returns you're going to have, we'll look at those numbers. So if RNG is on your side, it's going to cost a minimum of 62,000 Pansum to breed a perfect Temtem. That's because you're going to use 10 of the DNA strands that cost 5,000 and 12 of the ones that cost 1,000. But when you get down to the end of the breeding cycle, where we talked about the genders can go wrong, just having to recreate a 5 SV Temtem, if you get 2 of the same gender, costs 31,000 Pansums every single time you have to do it. So all of a sudden, perfect scenario of getting 6 Temtem or so for 62,000, plus a little bit more for each additional breeding. But all of a sudden, that cost goes up to 90,000 if you get one gender wrong. And if you get that gender wrong again, it costs another 30,000. So all of a sudden, you're at 120,000. So you can see how expensive this gets. But don't forget that if you manage your fertility, you're going to have 6 or more Temtem at 30 with perfect SVs. And you say roughly you can sell each of those perfect Temtem for 30,000 Pansums. You're looking at a total profit or a total sale revenue of 180,000 Pansums. So even if you spent 120,000, you're still walking away with 60,000 Pansums of profit.
And let's not forget, too, that all of those Temtem that mess up in the process as far as gender locking for you will still have the perfect amount of fertility for their point or their tier their point in the breeding tier, and can be useful to somebody else. So I would highly suggest selling those once you don't need them, but I would be very wary of being ripped off on the market. One things that people try and do often is pay you for the amount of DNA strands used, where they'll say like, oh, this is a 3SV Temtem. You use 2 DNA strands on the first tier, and then, you know, the Lith DNA on the second tier, and then the 5,000. So that would be 8,000. And I'll give you 8,000 for this Temtem. The thing you want to be very mindful of is every time you're breeding a Temtem, it costs you 50 pan son of attacks from the breeding center. That's also going to factor into the price. And then additionally, luck and RNG and egg moves are all things that you should be charging for. So I would say any egg move is worth an additional 1,000 if you're selling it. If you're selling a breeding reject that you didn't use, is worth 1,000, and then any RNG that that person needs is worth 1,000, so that you're at least making a profit off of your time. When people want to buy your breeding rejects, the minimum they're worth that people will try and tell you is 8,000 for the amount of DNA strands you used on them, but I would not be willing to part with them for any less than 10,000 if they have 3 SVs or higher, which is generally the tier you're going to be gender, which is you're going to be your tier where you're getting gender locked heavy, or you're going to have to start gender swapping with people, and you'll have a lot of these left over to get rid of.
Yeah, like we keep saying, you know, this is the MMO part. Don't be afraid to negotiate with people, find players, pass up on offers of if people are trying to undercut you, you know, and at the same time, don't, I think you'll find if you're trying to really undercut people or lowball them with offers, they're not going to take you up on that. So I wouldn't invest too much energy in it. But so, I mean, that's the basic process or that's more than the basic process of breeding, but just a few things to note. Especially about egg moves. Again, it's a trap where you can fall into it if you don't think through carefully. I know I did. Really think about what you're going to do and make sure the egg moves work. Something that I've ran into myself is sometimes you may have an egg move that can be passed through or learned for a Temtem, but only the evolved form of a Temtem can breed with the Temtem that has the egg move. For instance, Calibus has 3 egg moves it can learn, which, by the way, is one of the ones I bred myself, hence why I know so much about this one particularly. But one of its egg move is Toxic Slime, which is a toxic ability. So you need to learn that from a Temtem naturally that can learn Toxic Slime. And I'm just pulling up the list. So that's Blues. Blues is literally your only option for doing that. But Blues is only a toxic type. And where I'm going with all this is that you can't actually breed Blues with Kalazu, which is the first version of Calabliss, because Kalos is only a water type. So you actually will need to evolve Kalos first into Calabliss so it shares a type with Blues. Another thing to keep in mind is things like sometimes the egg move is only learned by the evolved form. So what that means is if you catch So some people will sell a Temtem, or they want to buy a Temtem that's going to learn an egg move. But if you buy that Temtem at level 35, for instance, and you need to evolve it, you're not going to be able to gain enough levels for it to evolve before you hit the level cap. So what that means is you're going to have to breed 1 generation of that Temtem as a female with a female offspring, not of the species that your final breed's going to be, just so you can get a level 1 version of that, and then level up that one to the level it will evolve at, and then hope that your offspring is male from the second time that you can then breed into your female. So it gets a little confusing, but the biggest advice is just really look at your egg moves, look at the types of what you're going to be breeding in, look at the evolved forms, and think about the levels. To make it even more complicated, there's a few egg moves that Temtem can learn, but they can't breed naturally with the Temtem that learn it by leveling up. And my example again is Calibus here. Calibus can learn the egg move Clinch, which is a normal type or a neutral type technique that you can get on the final version. But the only Temtem in the entire game that learns that naturally is Mix again. Oh, is that how you pronounce that? Is it MYX Mix, or how do you say it?
I say Mix.
Mix, okay. So Mix is the only Temtem that can learn Clinch normally, without it being an egg move by leveling up. but mix is crystal and mental. Well, Calibus is water and toxic, so that you'll never be able to breed that move onto Calibus. So you're like, why is that? How is that even possible? How do you get that egg move? And that's where Psypark comes into place. Is that there was a couple weeks ago, there was a Psypark where you could catch the base form Kalamazoo with Clench. So you needed to catch a Kalamazoo with 50 SV of a single type, 7 fertility, and that egg move. And if you got that, you were then able to get this extra egg move. So it's just something, again, to think about with the values of Temtems, and that a Calibus, for instance, with all 3 egg moves should be worth more than one with 2 egg moves, because it's very rare to be able to get that egg move into the process. With all that said, yeah, go ahead.
The other thing too on that is not all of the Temtem that they have planned to release are in the game now. So more breeding paths are going to open up in the future. And I think Bun Bun's evolution, Madrid, is also one of those ones that has a egg move it can learn with like Dust Vortex or something, but no way to breed it on to Bun currently. But in the future, when more Temtem become available, then those breeding paths are going to open up.
But that's really interesting. I didn't think about that. That's a great point. So that's why that happens. So Bun's another one where, in theory, you could, if Bun ever goes into Psypark, you'll be able to get one with that egg move. But until then, you're right, you'll have to wait for more Temtem to come out.
Yeah.
And once like the level cap gets increased as well, the whole evolution and not being able to evolve a wild Temtem before that'll also get easier. So I guess what we're saying, it's a little bit niche right now. It's a little bit harder to breed Temtem now than it will be, but it's certainly possible. A small note, by the way, so you can get a quest item for egg timers that will tell you exactly how much time until an egg hatches. So I highly recommend completing that quest before you start breeding too hardcore.
I know what I'm doing tonight, because I did not know that before just now.
You didn't have the egg timer? Good. Well, you learned something. That makes me happy. You pointed something out to me, and I've learned something as well. So that's good. Yeah, so you can get an egg timer. So the egg in your inventory will exactly tell you how many minutes and seconds and count down until it hatches. So you can plan that more carefully. Like I said, eggs only hatch when they're on your active team. If they're in your box, you won't incubate them and they won't hatch. Something I just thought of on that is important. Is people will actually pay more for a perfect Temtem that's in the egg than one that's already hatched. And that's because the original tamer name will update to their name when it hatches, and they also have a chance to rename the Temtem, right?
One thing with selling eggs of perfect Temtem, that's one of the cool things in this game. You can trade an egg to somebody else and let them hatch it. One thing with selling eggs, I would say if the breeding process is perfect, on average, an egg is worth about 10,000 more Pansun than just selling the perfect Temtem, because whoever you sells it to gets to be the original trainer, and they have an opportunity to nickname it. In some situations, buying eggs can actually be cheaper than buying perfect Temtem. I know there are lots of people out there that will gamble away the fertility of their perfect Temtem into eggs and then just sell the eggs. For instance, there's a lot of people doing this with Mushi right now. Mushi evolves into Mushuk, and Mushuk has 2 abilities. One that's absolutely amazing called Parrier, and if Mushuk has that ability, it's worth about 40,000 Pansun. And then another one that's not good at all called Resilient, or Tireless. Tireless is what it's called. And if it has that ability, it's worth about 15,000 Pansun, which is a huge difference. But people on average will sell random mushy eggs, which could have either of those 2 traits, for 20,000 Pansun. So in situations like that, sometimes it's fun to take the gamble and buy an egg and, see if you made money or you lost money. But that's just something to be on the lookout for when looking at egg prices and when pricing out your eggs.
That's a good point. When you are looking at trades that people are offering, just read what it shows about the egg, because it's going to tell you exactly what you're getting or not getting. If the Temtem has an egg move, even when it's in an egg, you'll still see that listed as a technique. And if the trait's been guaranteed with a DNA strand, you'll see the trait listed out. If it hasn't been guaranteed with a DNA strand, then it'll be question mark, question mark, question mark. And that's where that egg could be either trait. So just look very carefully and be mindful of this when you're buying and selling and trading. So, and understand then, therefore, that an egg with a determined trait that is not going to be random, if it's the good trait, it's going to be worth more, the egg will be. But if it's the bad trait, it's going to be worth less. And if it's a random trait, like you just said, it's going to be, somewhere in the middle of that. So, so with that said, just to close this out here in the breeding section, we've already talked about it a bit, but when you get all these perfect Temtem, what do you do with them exactly? How do you sell them? How do you turn them around? The biggest area I found, just the official Discord has multiple trading channels, constant people making posts. There's some other third-party Discords as well, and there's multiple trading websites. Eventually, there will be a trading house in-game, like I talked about in the roadmap, and that will make it all obviously a lot easier to connect with people, but there's still a lot of third-party, and the community itself has a lot of different areas to do this. I don't know if you have anything to add about that or your experiences with shopping around and selling and trading.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I guess I'll plug things that I'm not a part of. I use the Temtem official Discord. That marketplace I've found to be the most active and one of my favorites for trading. I use the Legion Gaming Discord. They have a marketplace on there for trading, although they delete all the posts at, I think, midnight every night. So you have to constantly repost in there to make sure people can see your offers. And then there is a subreddit for trading that I'm a part of too. I think it's just like Trade Temtem or something of that nature. But I found all of those to be effective, with the most effectiveness coming out of the official Temtem Discord.
Yeah, those are, and in addition to that, I've browsed and posted a little bit on temtrader.com and temtemtrading.com. I'm sure websites like this will just keep popping up. Although I do think it's interesting because once trading houses come in game, the life cycle of all these websites will die out. So there's kind of a limited lifespan for them, I think. But there's the point is there's a lot of ways out there in the community to trade right now in the meantime. With that said, I think that's going to cover us with the breeding and today's episode. So Kennedy, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and coming on and talking to me about breeding. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, thank you for the invite. Yeah. I had a lot of fun too.
So listen, if do you have some other stuff out there, by all means, go ahead and plug yourself. If people want to find out more stuff from you, what can they check out?
Yeah, I am at Presby Kennedy on any social media. You can find me on Twitter, Patreon, Facebook. But the main thing that I like doing, I run a YouTube channel where I live stream D&D content. We do live storytelling every Saturday night. It's called the world we play in. It's called Ilderon. The game is called Ilderon Tales. But you can find me on YouTube at Presby Kennedy, or you can search Ilderon Tales on Google, and that's spelled ILDERON Tales TALES. And we're like the first half dozen results. And then also, I am diving more into the Temtem community. I am streaming with Temporium GG, and I am one of the casters for a lot of the competitive tournaments coming up. And we're actually going to be streaming this weekend. They are some really cool, awesome people who are supporting the competitive Temtem community as far as until we get some ranked matchmaking and spectator modes inside of the game. And you can find them on twitch.com and just search Temporium GG, just like Temporium spelled inside of Temtem. And you can watch some really, really great matches. And I think they're streaming matches every Thursday, like some Fridays, and then every Saturday.
Oh, that sounds great. And you can get in contact with me at the show here for any questions or comments at temtalkshow@gmail.com. As always, please leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. It's really going to help with visibility of the show and get the word out. Thank you, everyone. Until next time.